Hey Stella, you okay? How are you today? Hey Andy mate, how's it going? Long time no see. How are you doing? Hey Rahul, good to see you sir. Hey Sanal, how is everyone? So today we're gonna do just had my, oh nice Andy, that's good. How did it go? Okay. So you're in recovery at the moment? You look so strange and handsome. I know I shame your hair off. Hello Joanna, happy Sunday. Let me just hit you up Joanna. There you go, welcome in. So today I thought I'd do something different. Rather than doing quizzes, I thought we'd do a museum tour for you all. This is my first time seeing you, so thanks, Ro. Yeah, so let's start this little tour then, guys. Welcome to hey Mary. So we're at the main exhibition at the Imperial War Museum in Manchester. So as you come in, first thing you get is a thank you for the much. You're welcome, Joanna. So as you see, we've got a B-50 Harrier jet up here. Morning, beautiful Mary. How are you? So as you can tell here, we have the AV-84 Harrier. It was a development of Hawker sideways revolutionary Harrier vertical takeoff and landing. Hey Vicky. As you can see, there's the old Harrier jet up there. And then we have a timeline of, we've got some artifacts in here. So that's a George Medal award to Edward Redknapp for bravery during the London Blitz. Redknapp was an air raid precautions warden on 9th of September 1940. He rescued people trapped in a basement shelter in Auburn. The basement was at risk of flooding as well as collapse, but Redknapp worked coolly and continuously for nearly 4 hours, inspiring by example the efforts of the rest of the squad until the last live casualty had been My day's going good, thanks, Ru. So that's a medal that was awarded. And then you got some more postcards and letters and stuff. The hats, and this is like the clothing they would have worn. So that's a handmade compass. And then a letter written by Albert Davis. So there's the boots he would have worn back in the day with the outfit and stuff. And that's a homemade pistol. Captain Clive Hopkins served with the United Nations protecting force in the Bosnian War. Hopkins of the Staffordshire Regiment attached to the Royal Welsh Fusiliers exchanged the pistol with Brigadier Bata, a local Bosnian Muslim militia leader for the period. Manchester Army Force, yes. Moving on, we've got England's rugby hero. Clark signed up to fight in the First World War, gassed twice. He still managed to become a world-class wrestler after war. And then in here you got, that's his wrestling, and his, from his wrestling you got his medals that he won, his little, some really old pictures from Mum's cousin. Oh really, Joanna? That'd be cool. I'm planning on going there in the next few weeks, I think. So it was an athletic sport, so like he fought in the First World War. Obviously, this is a picture of what it would have looked like. That's Mr. Port, the famous wrestler. Yes, really. So now we're going to go through the First War area. We'll try a model motorbike, which is up here. He was rescued by the Americans. He was grateful to the Americans. Oh wow, that's cool. That little Joanna. What's it? I'll have to check that out. So you can see some pictures, and this is a 1914 to 1917. In the summer of 1914, rivalries in Europe turned the crisis over Bosnia and Herzegovina into a world war across Europe. The decision to go to war was enthusiastically supported. Overseas empires were drawn in. Soldiers went willingly to the front. Civilians rushed to join up. The fighting was expected to be short and decisive. These illusions were soon shattered. New weapons using huge quantities of munitions turned the war into a costly, lengthy struggle. Both sides appeared to be equally balanced. For over 3 years, there seemed to be no end in sight. I would say, sorry about no kids, Lucy, you're going to have to go. Sorry, this is an 18 plus chatter on that. As you can see, and now we're moving on the Western Front line, 1914 to 17. The Western Front considered of lines of trenches running from the Belgian coast to Switzerland. From simple beginnings, a complicated system of defence gradually developed. Trenches were dug to protect soldiers from shells and rifle fire, but men lived under the constant threat of being killed or wounded. In the first half of 1916, even when the British fought, no major battles were suffered. An average of 600 casualties a day in life in the line was boring yet stressful. Most work was done at night. Food was monotonous and conditions harsh. Battles such as the Somme and Pasha were fought to break the deadlock. They achieved only limited success and demonstrated the constant artillery fire was vital if real progress was to be made. Hey Ramses, dude, good to see you. Hey Suba. That sounds like you from Arkansas. Good morning. Morning, Suba. Hope you're doing well. So here's some of the artifacts from the suicide corner. Some pictures of them in the trenches, working in the trenches. In some of the, like my mum's cousin died 5 years later. Oh wow. You can see the little whistles and some of the weaponry that they would have used back then. And then here we have a flamethrower from the HMS Vindictive. So this was a flamethrower that was on the Vindictive HMS. They have suicide corner. Cool. Wish we had. Yeah. And going along. So this is a steel window section from the ruins of the World Trade Center. So believe it or not, that is part of the World Trade Center, people. Part of the steel ruins from the World Trade Center. So rest in peace to all the people that lost their lives on that day. And here we have a Royal Assault Artillery E-Battery 13-pounder field gun. 13-pounder was introduced in 1904. It was a very mobile weapon and could be moved quickly by a team of 6 horses. It was also a quick-firing weapon. This was made possible by the recoil system on the carriage, which controlled the recoil of the gun and returned it to the reloading position. However, it soon became clear in 1914 that the 13-pounder was not powerful enough to be effective in trench warfare. Production shifted to the larger 18-pounder field gun. Over 100 years later, the Royal Horse Artillery still uses 13-pounders to fire salutes on the state occasions. So that is your 13-pounder artillery gun. So if you've never seen one of those, now you have. Then over here we got the Ronnie Horner, a captain in the Royal Army Service Corps, was imprisoned for 3.5 years by the Japanese. He kept his story hidden in a secret diary. So, Captain Ronnie Jack Horner was one of 80,000 British troops captured by the Japanese when Singapore fell in February 1942. For 3.5 years he survived harsh conditions, basic food rations and forced hard labour. Refusing to give up, he confided his feelings, thoughts and experiences in a diary he kept hidden in his suitcase. When he was held initially in Changi camp to boost morale, some prisoners, including Ronnie, organised entertainment such as concerts and plays. In May 1943, was one of those sent to construct the Thailand-Burma Railway. Prisoners were forced to work up to 12-hour days in the jungle with minimal rations. Disease was rife and beating were common. Weakened by dysentery and suffering from tropical ulcers, Ronnie eventually returned to Singapore in November 1943. Of the 3,300 men who had left Changi with him, over 800 were dead. Ronnie was liberated in August 1945. When he returned home, he took with him an amazing record of his captivity, a 55,000-word diary. Keeping a diary was strictly forbidden by the Japanese, but Ronnie concealed 2 volumes in the false bottom of his suitcase. And this is so the first night. So this is Ronnie himself. And this is a page from his diary that he written. Your uncle is a great hero, Rahu. Yes. This is him at a baby and his mum. To see we got the firing died down and out of the darkness. The great morn came. So the August 1914. War in the West. In the early September, Germans' attack on France was altered by French and British at the Battle of Marne. After 3 more months of fighting, neither side had won a decisive victory. By December 1914, 2 opposite lines of trenches stretched from the Belgian coast to Switzerland. From the western front, the fighting had become deadlocked. And then moving on to August to September 1914. War in the east. Germany had expected Russia to take several weeks to mobilise its army, but the Russians attacked first. On 17th of August, the Russians advanced into the German province of East Prussia. Within a month, they had suffered crushing defeats at the Battle of Tannenberg and the We knew one soon will be ready. I don't know what you mean there, Mr. Papakuma. But, so yeah, that's, and then obviously in February 1950, January 16th, war against Turkey, the Dardanelles and Gallipoli. Turkey entered the war on German side on 31st of October 1914. The following February, the British and French began a campaign to knock Turkey off the war and relieve the pressure on the Russians. Britain and France launched a naval assault against the Dardanelles. In April, French and British troops, including some from Australia and New Zealand, landed on the Gallipoli Peninsula. The Allies abandoned the campaign in January 1916, having failed. Hey, hello Jake, Arizona Jake, welcome in. Thank you. Having failed to achieve any of the objectives. And then in 1915, War of the Western Front throughout the year. Stalemate gripped the opposing trench lines in France and Belgium. In March, the British achieved fleeting success at the Battle of Neuve Chapelle. In April, the Germans briefly broke the Allied line at Ypres by using poison gas for the first time. These and later failures showed that much larger numbers of men and shells would be needed before a breakthrough by either side was possible. Futility. The war on 1915 war on the Eastern Front. The war on the Eastern Front was one of movement and changing fortunes. On 22nd of March, the Russians captured the Austro-Hungarian forces of Przemysl, but in early summer, a combined German and Austro-Hungarian attack drove the Russians out of Austria-Hungary. In some places, the Russians were forced to retreat for up to 300 miles. And then in here we got the war in the 1918, the first 14 to 1918, the First World War was the first conflict in which aeroplanes were used on large scale. Aircraft were used for two main purposes. They acted as the eyes of soldiers on the ground, observing the movement of troops and the progress of battles. They also worked with the artillery to make sure gunfire was accurate. As aeroplanes developed, they were armed with guns and often bombs. Aerial combat became widespread as both sides tried to dominate the sky above the trenches. Fighter aircraft also supported troops on the ground. By the end of the war, air power was an essential part of any battle. As you can see there, where to be all lined up on the field. Eyes in the sky. So one eyes in the sky for the first, yeah. Let me see, World War One and World War Two museum. Yeah, that's the one. And that's some goggles that got damaged during the flight. The gloves they would have worn while flying the planes, and the hats that they had on. Here we have a Mr. Douglas Haig, 1861 to 1928. On the outbreak of the First World War, he commanded one corps and then the First Army from December 1940, appointed Commander-in-Chief of the British forces in France in December 1915. The limited success and heavy casualties of his 1916 and 1917 offensive made him one of the most controversial figures of war. In 1918, under Haig's command, British and Empire troops spearheaded the Allied victory, winning a succession of battles and taking over 188,000 prisoners. Hello, Isa Vanilla, welcome in. And then 21st of February to 18th of December 1916, the Battle of Verdun. The Germans attacked the fortress of Verdun to bleed France white. German planned to inflict such enormous losses of the French that they would be unable to continue the war. Initial German advances did cause the French heavy casualties, but German losses also began to mount. By the end of the battle, the French had regained all their positions. Both sides had lost well over 300,000 men. On the 24th of April 1916, in an attempt, the Eastern Rising in Dublin, in an attempt to achieve independence, a group of militant Irish Republicans staged an uprising in Dublin. They seized key positions, including the General Post Office, and proclaimed a Republic. The rising lasted a week before it was put down by the British authorities. The execution of 14 of its leaders caused a wave of public sympathy and increased support for the nationalist cause. Amaxa, in 1914 to 1918, war against Turkey, Mesopotamia. On 5th of November 1914, an Indian army force landed in Mesopotamia, modern Iraq, to secure Britain's oil supplies in the Persian Gulf. The force advanced along the river Tigris towards Baghdad. 24 miles from the city, it was driven back by Turks to cut Al-Amara. After a 6-month siege, it finally surrendered in April 1916. A renewed campaign captured Baghdad in March 1917. By the end of the war, the British had gained full control of Mesopotamia. And then on the 31st of May 1916, the Battle of Jutland, a major naval battle between the British Grand Fleet and the German High Seas Fleet, had long been expected. When they clashed at Jutland, there was no decisive outcome. After a day's fighting, the Germans escaped under cover of darkness. So although the British had lost 14 ships and the Germans 11, neither could claim victory for the rest of the war. The German fleet rarely ventured out again. And then on the 1st of July to the 19th of November 1916, the Battle of the Somme. 19,240 men were killed on the opening day of the Battle of the Somme. Bloodiest day in the British Army's history. The battle lasted another 441 days. Until 1916, the French had led the Allied campaign on the western front of the Somme. The British took the lead for the first time. The battle was a grim, hard struggle in November. Worsening weather brought it to the end. The British suffered nearly 420,000 casualties, the French 204,000 and the Germans over 450,000. Moving on to beyond the Western Front, the First World War was also fought in Eastern Europe, Italy, the Balkans, the Middle East, and in Africa and the Pacific. Britain and France's Russian ally fought the Germans and Austro-Hungarians. The campaigns on the Eastern Front were much more mobile than on the Western Front armies. Advanced and retreated over large distances. Germans, Turkish ally fought the Russians in the Caucasus. The British, with French support, launched attacks against the Turks in Mesopotamia, Gallipoli, Egypt and Palestine. The fighting and huge losses suffered on those fronts brought about the end of the Russian, Austro-Hungarian and Turkish empires. So here's some artifacts from this era. So this is the night in the hospital, but where the casualties will be lying. That's the bandages from back in the day. Soldiers in the trenches. Hey Black Cat, good to see you. No, we've got waiting, watching, suspense, mourning, will never be anything else in life. Vera Brittain, Vadnais in Malta, 18th of April 1917. And this is David Lloyd George, 1863 to 1945. Born in Manchester, he served as Chancellor of the Exchequer from 1908 to 1915. Mobilised Britain's industrial resources and placed the nation on a true war footing as Minister of Munitions from May 1915. As a leader voice in British politics, he was the obvious choice to succeed Herbert Asquith as Prime Minister in December 1916. Although determined to fight the war in a different way, Lloyd George failed to develop an alternative strategy to concentrating British resources on the Western Front. And on the 1st of February 1917, beginning of unrestricted submarine warfare, the Germans launched a new and systemic campaign of submarine attacks on merchant ships using British ports. They hoped to starve Britain into surrender within 6 months. The Germans believed that the submarine was now the most effective way to defeat Britain. Shipping losses rose dramatically in April, 169 British and 204 other vessels were sunk from May. Merchant ships were brought together in convoys and losses slowly began to fall. On the, on the 6th of April, the United States declares war on Germany. Renewed German submarine attacks brought the United States into the war and firmly tilted the balance in favour of the Allies. America had been neutral since 1914, but German submarine attacks, including the sinking of the liner Lusitania in 1915, had outraged Americans. In March 1917, a German offer to support a Mexican invasion of the United States was made public. This, combined with the submarine attacks, finally persuaded the Americans to enter the war on the Allied side. March-November 1917, Russian Revolution. Successive defeats on the battlefield and worsening conditions at home led to 2 revolutions in Russia. The first overthrew Tsar Nicholas II, the second brought the communists to power. In March, the Tsar was forced to abdicate. The new provisional government was determined to continue the war, but after further defeats, the Bolsheviks, led by Lenin, seized power in November, promising peace. They formed the world's first communist government according to the calendar used by the Russians in 1917. The revolutions took place in February and October. Now, the war at sea, 1914 to 1918. Britain and Germany had spent vast sums of money developing their navies, and an early sea battle was expected, yet both navies were cautious about risking their expensive battle fleets. They met only once at Jutland. The result was inconclusive. For most of the war, the British and Germans used their navies to deprive each other of food and raw materials. From August 1940, Royal Navy ships blockaded the Channel and the North Sea to prevent supplies reaching Germany. This eventually caused severe shortages. From February 1915. German submarines attacked merchant ships heading for and leaving Britain. Increasing losses caused great anxiety. In 1917, a renewed submarine campaign brought America into the war. The threat to British shipping was reduced when ships began to travel in convoys protected by warships. Hey, Roll Call's cabin. Good to see you, my friend. And the HMS Sirius ship's wheel. During the First World War, German submarines and destroyers posed a threat to Allied shipping, making it strategically important to block the Belgian port of Ostend, where they were based. This is a ship's wheel recovered from HMS Sirius, which was deliberately sunk as a block ship to seal the entrance to Ostend harbour during a raid on 22nd to 23rd of April 1918. Sirius and the other block ship by Brilliant were reloaded with concrete and fitted with charges to blow out parts of the ship's bottoms. They were to be run in under a smoke screen and sunk in a deep water channel leading into the harbour. The channel was marked with buoys, but as the wind changed direction, the view of the buoys was obstructed by the smoke. The ships grounded themselves in the wrong place, 2,400 yards east of the harbour entrance. The home fronts, 1914 to 1918. The First World War was fought not just on the battlefronts but on the home fronts as well. Civilians were involved on a scale never seen before. Governments increased their control over people's lives. Strict regulations were introduced to protect national security and help the war effort. Food shortages led to rationing. Factories were converted to war production. Large numbers of women began to take on jobs previously only done by men. For the first time, Britain introduced compulsory military service. Airplanes and airships dropped bombs on cities and towns far beyond the front lines. Naval blockages caused severe shortages and hunger. The war touched everyone. There's a letter there from the Town Hall, Manchester, 17th December 1916, says, "Dear little ladies, thank you very much for sending me £1 note for the Broughton Home for Disabled Soldiers. I'm sure that the soldiers who will use the home will thank you as much as I do for your kind gift. I am hoping to receive a lot of money to help the great many soldiers who will not be able to work for their living. Yours sincerely, Lord Mayor." Cassie. Happy retirement days. Hey, Sadman, how are you? And this is just the pictures of them in the work. This is where the production lines are. So 1917 to 1918, both sides were fully mobilised for war by the middle of 1917. Each had suffered extensive casualties for little apparent gain. On the battlefield, many important lessons have been learned. New weapons like the tank were now in use by March 1918. Conditions were right for a return to mobile warfare. In November, after a further 8 months of fighting, the war finally came to an end with the defeat of Germany and its allies. So again, April 1917, the Western Front, the first Allied offensive of 1917, had mixed results. At Arras, the British and Canadians advanced 3.5 miles, the longest single advance so far on the Western Front as part of the battle. The Canadians stormed Vimy Ridge. A week later, the French attack on the Chemin des Dames failed. This triggered a series of mutinies that seriously weakened the French army for the rest of the year. From the 7th of June to the 10th of November 1917, again the Western Front. In the summer, the British began a new offensive aimed at the German submarine bases on the Belgian coast. They captured Messinger's Ridge in June before beginning a large assault at Ypres in July. Heavy rain turned the battlefield into a boggy marsh, making progress very slow. The attack ended after the capture of Passchendaele in November. It had cost around 275,000 British and 200,000 German casualties. On the 9th of December 1917, the war against Turkey, the capture of Jerusalem. In 1916, British and Empire troops crossed the Sinai Desert to Palestine after capturing the Palestinian town of Gaza in October 1917. They advanced on Jerusalem. The final campaign in Palestine took place in September 1918, supported by the Arabs. The British advanced over 300 miles towards Syria on 30th October. Turkey signed an armistice. This is Woodrow Wilson, 1856 to 1924, former university professor and governor of New Jersey. He was first elected president of the United States in 1912. Re-elected in 1916, he tried unsuccessfully to keep the United States out of the war. When America joined the Allies and association power in April 1917, Wilson attempted to introduce a clearer sense of moral purpose. Wilson published a 14-point plan as the basis for a new world order in January 1918. The eventual peace settlement failed to live up to his idealistic proposals. 3rd of March 1918, the Treaty of Brest-Litovsk. Following months of negotiation, the Germans and Austro-Hungarians signed a treaty with the communist government in Russia, ending the war on the Eastern Front. An armistice had come into effect in December 1917, following the November Revolution, but the severity of the German peace terms was difficult for the communists to accept. They reluctantly agreed to them only after a renewed German advance. 21st of March 18th to 18th of July 1918, German offensive on the Western Front. The Germans launched a series of attacks on the Western Front, hoping to win the war before the Americans arrived in any strength. Using troops released from Russia, they first attacked the British on the Somme and on the River Lys. They then hit the French in Champagne and on the Chemin Desert dams. Each time the Allied line was severely strained, but it did not break. On 1st of April 1918, the creation of the Royal Air Force. The Royal Air Force was the world's first independent air force. Since 1912, Britain's Army and Navy had maintained separate air forces, the Royal Flying Corps and the Royal Navy Air Service. A review of Britain's air service in the summer of 1917 recommended that they should be combined by the end of the war. The Royal Air Force was the largest air service of all the combatant nations.